It is 10:36 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. It is the 13th day. It's Wednesday the 13th of August 2025. And this is episode 1146 of Bitcoin. And we won't be talking about Bitcoin today. This is a Cathedral episode. I'm going to do, or attempt to do, the second installment of the Cathedral Project series, where we are talking about a 1,000-year silvopasture project. Yeah, I know it's not going to be Bitcoin, and this is a Bitcoin show. But here's the thing about Bitcoin is that without the rest of the world, then Bitcoin doesn't matter. It just doesn't. There are other things. There are people that want to be chefs. There are people that want to be gardeners. There are people that are lawyers and doctors, and all of us use money, and that includes permaculturists, that includes silvopasturists, that includes ranchers and farmers and agriculturalists, and everybody uses money. Everybody, right? So without being able to have a stable economic future, then all of that doesn't matter either. It takes both things. It takes the things that we do to make society what it is, but that society and those people require a good money, and that is actual Bitcoin, not any of this other crap that's running around. But why does it matter here? Why does good money matter here? Because it enables us to be able to dream once again. We can dream about things that honestly nobody would ever waste their time on dreaming about, simply because what's the point? The money is broken. And now we've been able to actually fix the money. And now we can dream again. And this is one of the dreams that will not leave me alone. I'm calling it Cathedral because it reminds me of the way that the old world used to do things. It used to take centuries to build a cathedral. Let's just think about old Europe, the old European cathedrals. You know, whoever it was that commissioned the cathedral was never going to see its completion, and they knew it. They weren't fooling themselves. They weren't lying to themselves. They weren't actually, thinking, "Oh, I can't wait to see this built." No, that's not the way it worked. And it also didn't work for the people that worked on the project, the stonemasons and the people that were doing part of the wood framing and the guys that handled mortaring, bricklaying, all of those guys. It would take several generations. And many of those people would hand their brickwork down to their sons and their sons to their sons. And it was a legacy of work. Everything about a cathedral in old Europe was legacy based, and this is no different. So let's just give you a quick recap in case you haven't heard the first part of the Cathedral series. I'm just going to do a quick recap. The entire legacy cathedral that I'm thinking of is based around 3 laws. The first law is that the land must become more fertile, abundant, and life-giving every single year. The second law is that every square inch must maximize its productivity without violating the first law. That's the caveat right there, and that introduces some interesting potentials into the future. But the third law is that no synthetic chemistry may ever be used unless its absence would violate the first or the second law. So it gets a little bit more interesting, doesn't it? Yes, this is a repurposed form of Isaac Asimov's 3 rules of robotics. Except here, they also make a sort of sense. You've got to have some guiding principles on a legacy project like this, and that's why I've written the rules the way that I've written them. So we are talking about 1,000 acres. All right, that's the plot of land that I'm thinking of. That's about 1.5 miles by 1.5 miles on a side. That is pretty much 1,000 acres. It is the perimeter Just think of it as a square for now. Yes, I know a lot of parcels of land are not squarish. The way that I'm presenting Cathedral right now is a model, and it will have to be reformatted given the landscape that it's put on. And some landscapes you will just never be able to put this on. You would never be able to do this at the top of a 13,000-foot mountain. You would also not be able to do it in places that are just, I don't know, a swamp or hilly. I mean, there's context here, right? So just when I think of this as a project that takes a blown out hayfield, something that's been hayed for 40 years, has completely destroyed the soil, and this entire system is built to regenerate that soil and stay productive and become more productive every year for at least 1,000 years. So the whole square is wrapped by a perimeter of trees. That's the first thing. There are two main exits or entrances. There's at least one exit and one entrance to the system. One is on the east side and one is on the west side. And the animals that will be grazing in this system move into the entrance. They move around all of the grazing lanes, which we'll get to in a second, and then exit the system at the end of a full year, right? And they, by that time, hopefully ready for those that are going to be culled and slaughtered to be culled and slaughtered, that they're fat enough, that they're big enough, that they're, they've got enough nutrition in them that they can now be harvested as the meat animals that they are. But I'm getting ahead of myself because the interior is alternating tree lanes that go from north to south, and there's a reason for that. The length of which, it's about I think it's 1,700 feet. It's almost, these tree lanes go almost to the opposite edge, but they alternate. Now, again, this was described in great detail in the first episode of this series. So if you have not listened to that, I will put a link in the show notes so that you can go listen to it. It's well over an hour long in the description of the general layout. So if you're confused as to what's going on, go listen to that one first. Now, for the rest of us that know what's going on, let's get into a little bit more detail about the perimeter and the tree lanes. That's all we're really going to talk about. Is how are they built? What are they built with? What's their purpose? How do they function? We're going to talk about all of that. Now, caveat, I'm working from an outline, right? So there may be times when you hear me pause because I'm looking at what the hell's in my outline and, fabricating a way to impart that to you here on the fly on the Bitcoin and podcast. So let's talk about the perimeter first. It's the first line of structure. It's the walls in which the cathedral is built. And I don't mind thinking about them. This whole thing is sort of a walled garden, right? We need walls. So at the very edge of the perimeter, if you were to just walk up to this thing and you just walk up from any direction, the first thing at the property line you're going to see is a dirt road. And then you're going to see a line of support trees. We'll get to that here in a second. And then you're going to see the primary trees. And then you're going to walk. So you've walked over the dirt road. You've walked past the first line of support trees. And now you're in the primary trees, which is in this case, black walnut. And then you walk further and there's another line of support trees. And then you can't walk any further. Why? Because there's a hedgerow, a thick hedgerow, an animal-tight hedgerow. In fact, not just animal-tight, hog-tight. Because if a hog can't get through that hedgerow, ain't nothing getting through that hedgerow. Hog-tight is about as tight as you can make anything. But if you were able to get to the other side of the hedgerow, you will see another road. And the entire interior, all the tree lanes, all the inside perimeter is wrapped with a secondary perimeter road because access to all parts of this place is critical. If you do not have access, you cannot manage a thing. To be able to manage anything, and this is going to be a high intensity management system, you have to have access. So that's why there's so much emphasis on an exterior perimeter road and an interior perimeter road. So let's think about the species of the trees that are in the perimeter. And this goes into the tree lanes too, but black locust trees, thornless honey locust trees, those are the two kinds of support trees. So why a locust species? They do a lot of work. They're not just there to be pretty. They're actually going to do a ton of work for us. For one, if I were to just plant black walnut trees and then try to grow a hedgerow, even if it's well outside of its leaf drop zone, it won't work because juglone. Walnut trees, pecan trees, black walnut, all of these trees commit chemical warfare. They drop in their leaves and sometimes in their twigs, but not so much in the wood. It's generally in their leaves and especially in the husks of either the pecan or the walnut, the husks that wrap over the shell of the pecan. When those things in the leaves drop, they carry this chemical called juglone, and it really inhibits other plants' ability to uptake water. That's really the main chemical action of juglone. And what it's designed to do is to make sure that the walnut and the pecan tree they don't have any competition. They just literally kill everything that they can drop their leaves on. So, but the leaching of the juglone to the side would not allow me to be able to grow anything at all. So what I do is I use juglone resistant trees on either side of the black walnut tree, because they don't care, and they'll just uptake everything. Like they will literally soak up all the juglone water. It's not really going to be able to get anywhere past the root masses of the black locust and the honey locust tree. So it will be a chemical buffer between the black walnut tree and the hedgerows. And that's why I am positive that the hedgerows will actually be able to thrive to the point that they are so thick and so tightly knit that they will be hog-tight. Now, does that mean that there won't ever have to be maintenance done on them? Yes, there will always have to be. This entire thing is a management nightmare, and that's one of the reasons why this project fascinates me so much, is because there's a way to manage this. Not by one person. It'll take a team of people, but that's for later episodes. We'll talk about management of this entire thing way later on. But for right now, our main tree is a black walnut tree. Our support trees are honey locust and black locust trees. And then we've got hedgerows. And those locust trees are specifically designed to be where they are to act as chemical buffers against the juglone chemical attack from the walnut trees or pecan trees, if that was a choice. Now, they also do another thing. Nitrogen fixation is part of what a legume does. What's funny is that while a black locust tree is a legume, a honey locust is not. However, it does have what's called associative nitrogen fixation. It's not necessarily a legume, so it doesn't have the little nitrogen fixation nodules all on its roots, but it does help other soil critters fix nitrogen. But they're not just there for that. So think about it this way. I got a row of black walnut trees. They're at one point or another, they're going to need to be fertilized. Well, why not just plant fertilizer permanently right next to the root zone of the black walnut tree? Well, that's why that's one of many reasons why these black locust and honey locust trees are there. We've already talked about chemical defense. So that's one reason. The other reason is that they're going to actually dump plant available nitrogen into the soil right where the tree that is the black walnut tree needs it, right at its root zone. The theory is that I'll never, ever have to actually dump chemical nitrogen fertilizer on any of these things. The tree lanes themselves will be self-fertilizing, and there's a couple of other ways to do that, again, later episodes. But that's one of the other reasons why locust trees are in this particular tree lane. There's another function here. Craft lumber and rot-resistant posts and animal fodder. Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. Have you ever seen black walnut wood? It's gorgeous. And just English walnut wood. I mean walnut wood. Go price it. Go price walnut wood. Hit Google or AI or whatever it is that you want to hit, and go price on a board foot situation the price of walnut, and be amazed at how expensive that shit is. And it's expensive for a lot of reasons. One, it's hard, which makes it durable, but it's also fairly easy to craft from a carpentry standpoint. It's not like working with something like Brazilian ironwood, which literally dulls everything it sees. So it's gorgeous wood. It's expensive wood. And we're growing black walnut, which is gorgeous, expensive wood. All right, so, but then outside of that, we've got honey locust, thornless honey locust, by the way. It has to be thornless. Otherwise, that son of a bitch starts putting out big Jesus, crown of Jesus thorns on it, and that thing needs to come down. They have to be thornless. Otherwise, real damage can occur. But both the honey locust as well as the black locust also make for high quality craft lumber. It's not anywhere close to as expensive as what you would pay for black walnut wood, but it is really high quality wood. Now for the black locust tree in particular, if you have black locust that's grown for 4 or 5 years and it's relatively straight, and most of them are, unless they get into a really funky situation, they grow really long, straight poles. If you use those poles in soil contact, like let's say fence posting, that's what America was built on. The black locust has been known as building the early Americas, or at least the United States, like at the time of the settlers and shit like that, because those posts are rot resistant. They actually have a fungicide as part of their chemical makeup contained in the wood. So those posts will last in the ground for anywhere between 70 to 100 years. I've seen people, or I've heard people talk about black locust wood posts that have lasted in the ground in full soil contact with no protection between the post and the soil for 100 years. Do that. Find me any other wood that does that. You won't. Black locust does it in spades, but it also makes some really pretty craft lumber. It's hard, but it's easily craftable. So because it's really hard, you could actually use it as flooring. I'm just saying these are all potential products, but one of the most immediate products that I need is animal fodder. Black locust in particular, its leaves are really high in nitrogen. Some people have said anywhere between 25 and 35% pure nitrogen. Dry weight. That's dry weight. Why would I need that? I need my animals to have nitrogen. They've got to be able to build protein. Nitrogen is what builds protein, at least in animals. Well, actually in everything, in plants too, because the amino acids that are part of any protein chain, they are nitrogenous containing. And if you don't have nitrogen, son, you ain't getting protein. So and this is going to go into the management part, which is going to be a separate podcast episode. We're going to be what's called pollarding the black locust trees at the top, which means at about 6 to 8 feet up, I'm going to basically delimb the black locust trees. and not all of them all at once, right? This is part of the time management that's going to have to go into the Cathedral Project. But let's just keep it simple. Just think of, I've got cows that are coming through the grazing lanes, which are between each of the tree lanes. And I have not only grazing material on the ground, I have tree fodder. Now, this is actually a concept that I learned from, what's that guy's name? Oh, he wrote the book Tree Crops, and I am totally fumbling this guy's name, although I can find it here really quick. J. Russell Smith. If you have not picked up Tree Crops, and it's an old book, I mean, I think 1930s, maybe somewhere around there. It's an excellent book that talks about all manner of different kinds of trees and what they produce and what you can do with it. And in this particular case, I'm talking about using it as supplemental fodder, especially nitrogen-rich fodder. So we pollar the trees at about anywhere between 6 and 8 foot up. It won't kill the black locust tree, especially if you do it at a particular time of year. But again, that's a management issue. So we take the tops of the trees off. We go and we basically lay it into the field and let the cows munch on the leaves. And they will. They will. They're going to want this stuff. It's pretty palatable to animals. It is a great nitrogen supplement. So now I've got not only the grazing alleys that are feeding the animals, I've got tree fodder, and I've got thousands of these trees. Thousands of them. How to manage that is part of the puzzle. But just for right now, realize that everywhere I go on this land, there's food everywhere for these animals. Okay, now there's another tree that's in the support lanes, aren't there? That would be the thornless honey locust. Not really going to pollard those. Maybe. It depends. Where they shine for animal fodder is not in the leaves. It's in these very long pods that they grow. And they're rich in sugar. Not so much as nitrogen, they're rich in sugars, which is also a component that ruminants are looking for. They're not just looking for pure protein. That's why you don't feed ruminants just pure alfalfa, which is high in nitrogen. You don't feed them just pure clover, which is high in nitrogen. They need a mix of carbohydrates, which contain a lot of carbon, and nitrogen. Without those two things, you're not really getting a good graze, okay? So this part of the support structure, these things put off, at maturity, these things put off hundreds of pounds of pods. And I can either give it to the cow directly and they'll just munch the pods, but they have hard seeds, so maybe it goes through a grinder and we pelletize it. And we use that as supplemental feed on the graze. Okay, so now I've got grazing from grass, forbs, and legumes in the grazing lanes. I've got a high nitrogen feed that I can supplement that with, and now I've got a high carbohydrate feed that I can further supplement the animals with. And again, since they are down every single tree lane, these trees are everywhere. Fodder for the animals is not only everywhere, the trees they come from are serving multiple facets. They defend the hedgerows against chemical attack. They make great craft wood. They fix nitrogen, or they allow the thornless honey locust allow associative nitrogen fixation, which isn't a legume. It's not direct, but it does impact the amount of fertility that goes into the soil, which then feeds the black walnut trees. This is all designed to work in concert. It's all designed to work together. But there's more functionality in the perimeter and the tree lanes. A black locust tree and a black walnut tree and thornless honey locust trees can get really tall. Now, the thornless honey locust is going to be, if you just allow these things to go to maturity, which In some cases we do, in some cases we don't. Again, a management issue, that's for later. Black walnuts and thornless honey locusts are going to grow way taller than a black locust tree, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Just think of the black walnut tree. 70 feet high, 80 feet high. That's a tall tree. I've got a lane of them. I've got 23 lanes of these trees inside the perimeter, which is also black locust and support trees. What does that do? Windbreak. It protects the animals that are grazing inside the system. Winter, fall, summer, it doesn't matter. The amount of treeage, if that's an actual word, I don't think it is, but the amount of treeage present and the way that the lanes are built, going north to south and having a complete perimeter around the entire thing, is a gigantic windbreak. And one of the things that kills animals, especially in winter, it's not the cold. It's the wind along with the cold. But in the summer, especially in places like Texas where it gets super freaking hot, that wind can just really, really hurt animals. And those are the two extremes. Spring and fall, not so worried as much about that. But winter especially will rob an animal of its body heat faster than anything. But if you've got cows that are completely protected from wind from almost all directions that you can think of, except for maybe a down blast, then these animals will winter a bit better, burn less calories, at least in theory, because they're not burning calories because all the wind just keeps robbing their body heat from them, right? That's convection. It just robs heat. But if there's no wind and the air is still, it can be insulatory, and we don't want wind inside the system. So that's one of the reasons you've got a complete surround of perimeter trees. But then this is one of the things that I really like about the system: snow capture to recharge water in spring. How does that work? Okay, middle of winter. It's not there. I mean, even in a blinding snowstorm where it's snowing sideways and all that kind of stuff, it's not doing that inside the system. The snow that falls into the system is not going to get blown away. It'll just accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. And of course, this is in regions where snow actually does fall in some appreciable amount. Like you're not going to get snow if you put one of these systems down in, I don't know, somewhere around Big Bend, Texas. It's just not going to happen. But in Lubbock, certainly in Amarillo, in the high plains of West Texas and eastern New Mexico, oh shit, yeah, you're going to get snow. I mean, in some cases, you're going to get a lot of snow, and none of that snow, once it enters the system, it can't get blown out. So it just stays there until it melts, which means that the water that you've been able to trap over the winter stays where it's put. So that's going to help kickstart the whole system every spring. Everything's going to get watered because you're going to be able to capture the snow and keep it on site. So that's sort of the way that I'm looking at the tree lanes and the perimeter trees. But let's focus in on the black walnut tree. This is the core of this system. It doesn't have to be a black walnut tree. It could be an English walnut tree. It could be pecans of any, like there's Indian pecans. There's like, I don't know, there's something called a Bradford pecan. Who knows? There's maybe a Brazos pecan. There's hundreds of different kinds of pecans. Just pick one. It doesn't matter. You could do this with probably chestnut trees, right? Now, chestnut trees don't throw off the juglone like pecan and walnut trees, but I would still have the black locust and the thornless honey locust there for all the rest of the things that it does. But let's narrow in on black walnut. So I've already said that it has a massive amount of juglone production, and that impacts ecosystems. because it tries to kill everything it touches. But we've got that buffered out. So let's move to the next Y, black walnut. Black walnuts are disease resistant. And within a limit, they're fairly drought tolerant. I want that, especially in something like a blown out hayfield or an overproduced cotton field somewhere in the high plains of West Texas. Again, it doesn't have to be there. It's just this is where I envision starting it out. But the nut crop. Oh, the nut crop. Walnuts are pretty tasty. Have you ever tasted a black walnut? It's a richer flavor. Its meat has a market demand. You know, sure, you can say, well, yeah, walnut prices are depressed right now. Yeah, that's true. But nobody really sells sacks of black walnut meat, right? So there's the issue of trying to give the market something different, something you can upsell, something that sounds fancy, right? But black walnut meat, I think, is superior to English walnut meat. I'm just saying, of course, that's just me, but I like its disease resistance. I like its drought tolerance. So we talked about craft lumber. Now, let's see here. How do I want to approach this one kind of delicately, because this one kind of goes into the management issue. So I think I'm going to hold off on this next thing. Yeah, let's hold off on this and just say that the primary crop here for at least the tree lanes is the nut production of the black walnut tree, or whatever it is tree that you could slip in there, like pecan or possibly American Chinese hybrid chestnut trees, right? So, but they do so much more for the system. It's not just the nut production. Cathedral isn't being a nut grove. It's about being a system that part of it is a nut grove. The other part of it is grazing for animals. There are other pieces and parts. But if we were to stay in the tree lane, let's look at the root architecture in the soil structure that's in the tree lanes. What's going on here? Deep, deep, deep tap roots, especially by black locust. They tap pretty damn deep. I've tried to dig one out. I've tried to dig a small one out, and it is amazing how deep those roots actually go. And then they've got a lot of lateral roots, but that's more about the honey locust tree and the black walnut tree. So we've got a lot of carboniferous mass in the soil. While I'm not using the support trees for animal fodder, like I'm not pollarding at 6 to 8 feet high the very tops of the black locust trees. While those leaves are connected to the tree, they are photosynthesizing. So what does that mean? Well, that means that it's delivering a lot of sugars to all the soil critters in the soil of the tree lanes. Now, let's kind of go back to how you would kickstart this system. You got to plant these trees. I mean, somebody's got to plant them. They're not. You're not just going to conjure them up out of the ground. Somebody has got to go out there and dig a hole and plant a sapling. And in this case, it's going to be several thousand of at least 3 different kinds of trees. We'll get to some other ones, but for now, we're just focusing on these 3 kinds of trees. If you were to do something like, I don't know, inoculate the roots of the sapling with mycorrhizal fungi, specifically arbuscular mycorrhizae, which is an endomycorrhizae, and then some ectomycorrhizae, because these 3 trees, they're going to want fungi that coat their roots, but they're also going to want fungi that go into their roots and penetrate cell walls and set up shop. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. But if I've got like a 1,700 foot tree or foot long tree lane, and there's trees on the left side, trees in the center, and trees on the right side, and let's not forget the hedgerow roots. They're all going to be connected. All right. If all of them are connected to mycorrhizae in the soil, then all of them are connected as a chemical circuit and as a communications circuit. So let's say at the very end of one of these very long, almost 1.5 mile long rows of trees, maybe something tries to attack one of the black locust trees at the very, very end, an insect, or maybe some kind of walnut wood borer that I don't know about, right? That tree is now physically under attack. Most plants, including trees and bushes and shrubs, will put off chemical signals that they are being attacked. It's like it just happens. They exude out through their roots. In some cases, there's evidence that some of that chemistry gets into the air. And if another tree of the same species, or maybe even a related species, picks up on that signal, but is not yet under attack, then it can start forming its defenses against that attack. Now let's go back to the circuitry under the soil. All these trees are connected. 3 different species: black walnut, black locust, and thornless honey locust. Right? So that's honestly that's a pretty good attack vector insofar as surface area is concerned. There's a lot of trees. There's 3 different kinds. They're all kind of clumped together. You never know, man. But all these trees are going to be connected through the ecto and endo mycorrhizal fungal network that's in the soil. The tree at the very end is going to be connected to the next tree by this particular fungus. That tree is going to be connected to its neighbor through that same fungus. The support trees, they will also be picking up the chemical signals of any attack or disease or whatever. And all of them are going to be, if they pick up on the signal and can interpret that chemical signal and say, oh, we should probably gird ourselves for attack, then they will be able to do that. They will be knowledgeable about what's going on in the ecosystem. This continues all the way down to the lane at the very opposite end where it connects with the perimeter trees. Those trees are also likewise connected, because everywhere we planted a tree, we made sure that we were inoculating with mycorrhizal fungi. There's a lot more that goes into this when we're prepping, but that's for a later episode. But for right now, just remember that when you see a row of trees in a forest, you may not be thinking about what's going on underneath the soil. What's going on underneath the soil is a gigantic computer circuit, and it is processing information inputs like disease, rain, temperature. And I guarantee you that it is formulating, in a very different way than our normal computers would do, calculations on what to do next. Like, for instance, drought hits on, like, it doesn't rain for whatever reason, and this happens. It doesn't rain for all year long on one side of this 1.5 mile wide system. It happens. I mean, there's farmers that you know, they look at their neighbors just across the road, and their neighbors continuously get rain, but just on the opposite side of the road where they are, no rain for all year. Happens. So one side of the system is dry. Hell, it's not just chemical signals that are transmitted through the mycorrhizal fungi. Nutrients are transmitted. Water is transferred. Not transmitted. Transmitted is a bad word. Transferred. Physically transferred. Nitrogen goes from trees that have more nitrogen than they know what to do with to trees that are nitrogen poor. Same for phosphorus. Same for potassium. Same for any of the micronutrients that you might find, but also water molecules travel through the mycorrhizal fungi from trees that have enough water to trees that don't have enough water. Now go back and think about this from above. There's a complete border of perimeter trees that form a box. Half of the interior tree lanes connect to the south side of the box, and the other half of the tree lanes connect to the north side of the box. all of the tree lanes are connected to all of the perimeter trees. Every tree has an information and transfer, or rather a shipping lane, open to them from the extreme northeast corner of the system all the way to the southwest corner of the system. Water can freely flow. Nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, any of the micronutrients can freely flow throughout the entirety of the system. So things that are rich in water or nutrients or what have you are able to shuttle that physically to where they are poor, and the whole system equals out. As long as you don't do something stupid like use pesticides or herbicides or, God forbid, fungicides. As long as you have healthy soil, then all these trees should have a communications and shipping lane network that rivals Walmart. That's another reason the system is designed the way it is. Now, why the hedgerows? Why the hedgerows? Why are they animal, or why are they hog-tight? Two reasons. One, I don't want the cows getting into the tree lanes. I don't. I really don't want the cows in there. They'll loaf in there. They'll sit under the shade. They won't graze. They'll be lazy. You'll get loafers. No rancher wants a loafing cow. They want them out in the pasture eating, right? So that's one thing. It's containment for the grazing animals. Because it's not just cows that are going to be in the graze. There's chickens that come after, but again, we'll talk about that on another episode when we just talk specifically about grazing lanes. This is about the tree lanes. But maybe I want to keep some animals in. There's an animal that I'm thinking of in my mind that is a forest creature. And it's tasty. But it's a forest creature. It's not a pasture creature. It was never really built to be out in the sun all day long. It wasn't really built to eat grass all day long. So what animal might I be thinking of? A hog. That's right. Pigs. Pigs and hogs. They're forest animals. They're not pasture animals. Yes, you can pasture pork. Yes, you can yes, I could feed cows in the tree lanes, keep them shaded and just truck in hay, but that's not very efficient. And it's very expensive. So that, grazing animals should be grazing. Forest animals should be in the forest. I've got 23 forests plus a perimeter forest. So if I've got really tight, animal-tight hedgerows all around all the perimeters, then I can now start treating the interior of the tree lanes to raise hogs and pork, right? So how would I do that? I might rotationally graze the pigs. Well, you really wouldn't be grazing them because there's probably not a lot of grass underneath that canopy. So we would actually be having to truck in feed or let them eat black walnut. Maybe I'm just finishing the hogs in the tree lanes. Maybe I just pick one tree lane that is not going to be harvested for its black walnut. We just shake the black walnut tree. We let the black walnuts fall to the ground. Hogs will eat them, especially if you do them right. Maybe dehusk the walnuts. But I'm thinking of Portugal and parts of Spain where they raise hogs in a silvopasture that is predominantly cork oak tree and grass. That's definition of silvopasture. You got trees and pasture. But they finish the hogs, they let the hogs graze, and then when the acorns come in on the cork oak, then they just basically shake the tree and let the acorns fall to the ground, and the hogs just go freaking nuts on acorns, which is, pretty high in tannins. Not as high as like live oak, but still there's tannic acid and stuff there's a reason that humans don't really get into like making acorn flour because it's really hard to do, but hogs love it. Their stomachs get along fine with it. It's nothing you got to worry about with these hogs. These hogs make some of the most sought after hams and prosciuttos and, cured meats of evil. They're really famous pork, fetches a really high quality price at, the supermarket if you can find it, because this is imported. You got to go to a high end grocery store in the United States to find this stuff, right? But let's go back to black walnut or pecan or chestnut. What would it be worth to be able to tell your customers that you have chestnut finished pork? My pork is finished on black walnut. My pork is finished off on pecans. So you get them to a good weight. Then you get into the fall, you've got your nut drop. You sacrifice one full 1.5 mile long lane, or maybe not even that. Depends on how many hogs do you want to finish in one of these lanes. All right, half of it, use some electro netting or, electro fencing. And yes, you'll want like a double layer of that stuff, because hogs are hogs. I won't get into it, but they're pretty ornery animals. Anyway, how many hogs do you want to finish? And you've only got you only have to string a fence, an electric fence, 100, maybe 130 feet long, because everything else is contained by the hedgerows. Hogs can't get out. Besides, if they're eating a bunch of walnuts that they want to eat, they don't want to get out. They want to eat, and they're going to poop. They're going to poop right there, which is one of the reasons you kind of don't want to do this in all of your lanes, because the USDA's got regulations as to animal manure on the ground if you're harvesting a nut crop off of the ground, which, like pecans, you shake the tree, the nuts fall to the ground, you get a sweeper, you sweep up the pecans, and that's how you do it. But the USDA and health agencies really don't like the thought of, these pecans or walnuts being on the ground and landing in pig manure and then being sold to the public. See how that works? And it's probably not a bad idea anyway. Either event, that's why you would maybe just do half a lane, a quarter of a lane, one full, lane, and then all the nuts in there basically go to finish the hogs. What if I wanted to use the forest canopy of the tree lanes to raise hogs year round? Well, you're going to need to feed them something, so you're going to be trucking in food. They're going to be pooping all over the place and urinating, which is going to add manure and urine or high nitrogen to the soil, so you're getting a hell of a lot of fertilizer. You're also getting a hell of a lot of gut bacteria that is going to replenish the bacteria in the soil. And honestly, it's not a terrible way to go. Do you want to do it for all 23 lanes? Well, no. You'd have to pull the hogs off what is it like? I think it's 90 days. You can't have manure on the ground something like for 30 days before you do a nut harvest. It's something like that. There's an amount of days. And that gives, if you take them off 3 months before you harvest, that gives you 2 months for the manure to break down and wash into the soil, get the ground cleaned up, and then your nuts can drop and you'll be fine. But that's why you don't do you wouldn't do every single lane on this, right? Honestly, it's the management on that alone is just kind of scary. But sacrificing one lane for hogs and be able to say, hey, black walnut finished ham, black walnut finished bacon, you're going to be able to set a premium price for your hog products. So the animal can be in the tree lane and the animals can be outside the tree lane, and neither the tween shall meet, because you've got a big, thick, and I'm talking 5 foot thick to 10 foot thick hedgerow. What else can you do with a hedgerow? Berries, like raspberries. That's part, if you've ever tried to, handle a raspberry bush, you know that they're kind of thorny. You got a bunch of them in a hedgerow along with maybe some other things that might be thorny. Well, you've got yourself a picket situation that you can get. Your clients can come to the farm and you give them a basket and say, it's $10 a pound for raspberries, and you can pick all you want. That way you don't have to shell out the labor of picking them. And then when the raspberries go away, whatever, It doesn't matter. But the hedgerows are also there for critters, for birds to nest in. That ends up being part of something else that I want to get into later when we get into integrated pest management. But let me just say it this way. Birds, especially certain kinds, really like to eat flies. And what is a problem with cows? You get fly strike. You get fly strike, and it's not good. It's not pretty, man, especially if they get really hardcore hit by a bunch of flies. You know why they get hit by flies? Because in 1973, Mr. Butts, the Secretary of Agriculture at the time, told everybody to rip out everything. When he said plant fence row to fence row, what he was actually telling people to do is that those trees that buffer your land, you need to get rid of them so you can have extra acres. That's what he meant by fence row to fence row. And that's why when you drive through Iowa, you don't see trees. And guess what happens without trees? Well, you don't get birds. That's what happens. And what do birds eat? Insects. They like insects. Some birds really like flies. And they would eat the flies off the back of a cow if they had a place to raise their babies, which in the middle of corn country like Iowa or the panhandle of West Texas, which is cotton country, there's not a lot of trees, not out in the fields. So that's why there's no birds. And that's why you get massive fly pressure on grazing animals. Let's reverse that. Let's give them a place to live. Let's encourage the birds. Let's encourage the little hedgehogs and other critters. Let's do that by giving them this massive hedgerow that acts as protection, nesting places, food sources. And at the same time, we'll have that hedgerow keep the cows where the cows need to be and the hogs where the hogs need to be. Keep the chickens where the chickens need to be and the llamas where the llamas need to be. It depends on what kind of livestock we're talking about, right? But it is a fence. It is a home. It is an attractant to the things that will help you manage insect pests on this particular system. So I do want to talk about biochar as a core element here for a couple of seconds. This is non-negotiable. Biochar has to be involved in this system, not only in the tree lanes, but everywhere, except the perimeter roads. I'm not going to waste my time putting biochar on a road. That's not what it's for. But in the grazing lanes and in the tree lanes, biochar has to happen. Why? Water retention during the dry months. If I've got biochar, which is simply just think of it as charcoal, the kind of charcoal you don't want to use on your grill, but it's got a lot of surface area. If you look at it under a microscope or like a scanning electron microscope, it's nothing but a bunch of holes. It's just filled with air. That's why it's so light, right? So what fills those holes? Water gets in there and adheres to all the surface area. In fact, if you get a gram of biochar and you were to smash it all out to where it was nothing but a two-dimensional surface, it would be as large as an NBA official sized basketball court. That's a lot of surface area. And at a molecular level, water basically glues itself to that surface. And the only way that it's coming off is not through evaporation. A tree or a plant or some living thing has to chemically strip it off. And that means that the water retention of biochar is absolutely critical in the soil during dry months so that it remains as a reservoir of underground water sources for all of the trees and all of the hedgerows and all of the grasses and everything. But it also stores nutrients. Nutrients are also chemically glued to the surface of biochar. So it acts as a battery, another reservoir for nutrients. So it completely buffers water, it completely buffers nutrition, and it also provides a massive home for fungus, which is, we've already talked about how critical that is. And the fact that, like, if a fungus filament like a fungus filament attaches to a bunch of biochar that has water molecularly stored on it, and the other end of that is connected to trees that need water, guess what's going to happen? That mycorrhizae is going to be able to displace that water molecule, throw a proton on there to make sure it's okay, because you can't just strip something off without putting something back on. So it will throw a proton on there, and then it will take that water molecule and it will give it to the tree in exchange for what? Sugar. For sugar. I love everything about this system. Then the carbon storage aspect of this will speak to the more hysterical parts of the climate change crowd. Now, I don't want to pick on them. Not right now, because they have this idea of having a situation where if I can prove that I stored a ton of carbon into the ground, they will give me $100. I'm talking about storing millions of tons of carbon in this system, to the point that I will not stop putting carbon in the form of charcoal into this soil for all the cool shit that it does, which I would do anyway, by the way, until it hits to somewhere between 35 and 40% carbon. If I were to take it to a soil analysis lab and say, how much carbon is in this soil? When they say 35%, that's when I start considering not putting any more carbon in the soil. And by that time, that system is completely drought tolerant, to the point that it may actually survive 2 full seasons without any rain whatsoever, as long as all of the biochar or all of the carbon that comprises 35% of the soil to a depth of, like, let's say, I don't know, I want to go deep, 24, 36 inches, maybe 4 feet, maybe 5. It depends on how far down I can get it. I would want 10 feet of 35% to 45 or to 40% carbon every square inch of the soil, because of the amount of nutrients that it can hold and buffer, the amount of water it can hold and buffer. And if I do that, the amount of raw tons of carbon that we're talking about, if you want to start adding up the numbers, that's going to be another episode, but we're talking millions of dollars, like millions of dollars on, 2-3 years, maybe 250,000 a year as extra income, just for putting something in your soil that's going to do nothing but help your production later. That's how we think about Cathedral. That's the way that I want to think about Cathedral. It's a carbon landfill. I would literally actually put that on a brochure if I wanted to sell this particular deal to somebody who is a climate hystericist. I got an idea for a carbon landfill, and here's how it's going to work. I don't even need to tell them about harvesting nuts and feeding hogs and doing grazing. I don't need to tell them anything. All I need to tell them is how much carbon, physical carbon, I'm going to sequester in the soil for 1,000 years or more. More likely about 10 to 20,000 years, that carbon is never leaving that soil. I can get all the carbon. I can sell all the carbon credits I want. I'm not leaving that money on the table just because it's bullshit. I wholeheartedly believe that the climate change hystericists are doing nothing but damage. But if they're going to pay me to put raw carbon into the ground, and I know what that carbon can do for soil, yes, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to take their money all the way to the bank, and I'm going to skip there while I'm smiling and laughing, because I just don't care anymore. I would put that carbon in the soil anyway. So it's an ongoing integration, periodic additions of carbon over decades and decades and decades. Just let's get off that, because I can go on and on and on about carbon. So we've talked about livestock and wildlife in the tree lane systems. We've talked about hedgerows as living fences with a few hidden jobs. We've talked about fungal circuitry. Let's talk a little bit about long-term succession and revenue stability. So what are we getting out of the tree lanes? Let's not talk about grazing. Let's not talk about, harvesting meat. Let's not talk about anything other than what's going on inside the tree lanes. We have planned harvest cycles for craft lumber. That's number one. All right. So that's one of the other products that we can get. Now, I've touched on that, but let me kind of fill that in for you. There's a couple of different ways to imagine Cathedral. One is at the end of its life, which is, I think, would be 10,000 years. I don't even think you'd actually have to kill it. I think it'd have to be hit by a meteor. It'd be so productive. Why would you want to tear everything out and build a mall on it? Right? Okay, so 10,000 years in the future, we don't need to worry about. But there's two other ways to think of it. One, when you're looking at the blown out hayfield that's got nothing on it, how do you start? Oh shit, that's several other podcast episodes. Well, I'm not even going to touch that. But one of the other ways to think about it is everything worked, everything's fine. Yes, I know we live in the real world. Everything's not going to be fine, but we got to start somewhere. So let's talk about Cathedral at 75 years old, and every tree is mature and at maximum height. What should I do? Do I keep it the same? No. Because eventually all of those black walnut trees or pecan trees, whatever nut-bearing tree, they're going to decline in productivity of their nut harvest. Why keep them? Cut them down. That's what we're going to do. We're going to deforest everything. We're going to kill all the trees, all these trees that I've spent so much time telling you about how cool they are and how much I love them. I'm going to kill them. Not all of them, well, actually all of them, but not all at once. And that's the key. So how does this work? The way this works is I envision Cathedral's nut production, just the nut production, at only ever achieving 92 to 95% of its potential. How does that work? Because we're going to be cutting down some trees. So let's say I've got 1,700 linear feet of black walnut trees. I've got 23 lanes. How many trees do I cut down that cause me to reach 95 or 90? Yeah, let's say 95% production. I've got to take 5% of my trees away. And I'll start like let's say we'll start at the furthest western lane of trees, the interior lanes. Start at the furthest west one and start at the very, very end, where it's almost touching the other side, but there's that place where the cows can move from one pasture lane to the other pasture lane. So it kind of terminates right there. We'll cut enough of those trees down to where the entire system is only producing 95% of its potential nut drop. Okay, so we've cut those trees down. Yay, we've cut them down. Why? Well, the wood, craft lumber. Hell, even if I just sell not vertically integrated at all, I don't have my own wood mill, let's say. I don't have any other way to treat that wood other than to hire somebody who wants the wood because they know it's precious, they know they're going to make a shit ton of money on it, and they pay me a shit ton of money to take that tree away. Maybe they'll even cut it down and do it in a way that doesn't damage the system, right? So they paid me a lot of money. In fact, I might be able to get paid about $200,000 for the amount of trees that I'm thinking of cutting it down. Well, you got to replace those trees. So what do you do? Again, this goes into the management system, I'll talk about that in another episode. But I don't want to leave you hanging off the cliff. I've got a bunch of stumps in that tree lane, and I have no nut production. I'm going to want nut production. So there's a couple things that I do. I make sure that I treat the black walnut tree stumps with something like drilling holes into them and packing those holes full of like oyster mushroom spawn or something that's going to degrade that wood, that entire stump over time, all the way down back to soil, and possibly give me a mushroom yield that I would be able to sell in the farmer's market, which is also part of the system. We won't get to it right now. I've got to replace those trees. So just so happens that part of the cathedral system includes its very own greenhouse, because you're constantly going to be growing saplings, because you need to constantly be replacing trees that you cut down so that you can harvest it for wood and sell it and rejuvenate on a continual basis your nut production with new trees. So you plant those trees in between the stumps of the black walnut trees that you just cut down. You did not cut down, and hopefully did not damage, but even if you did, you could always replant the honey locust and black walnut trees that will now serve to shade the baby tree. The canopy will start growing in, and dappled shade is part of what honey locust and black locust provide. It's not full shade, it's partial shade. And black walnuts do not like being in full sun. Oh my God, we've just got yet one more function for the black walnut tree, or for the black locust and the honey locust trees acting as support trees. Nitrogen fixation, animal fodder, craft lumber, helps with the windbreak, and now it's going to shade our brand new baby trees that we just inoculated with yet more fungus put into the ground in between the stumps where the other trees were. And those will take like anywhere between 4 and 7 years to come into nut production. And even then, they will not be at full nut production, right? So now we start having to ask ourselves the question, how many trees do we cut down to maintain between 92 and 95% nut production when we have to wait 4 to 7 years for any nut production on new trees? And then what percentage of the new nut tree is nut production compared to when it's going to be mature? It's going to be different. There's going to be more limbs when it's older, right? There's going to be more flower buds. There's going to be more places for walnuts to form on a mature tree than a young tree. So now we start having to look at the future as a fluid thing. Like what will it produce this year? What will it produce next year? What will it produce next year? When will it start getting to a mature status of harvest in tonnage or bushels of nuts, right? That's at that point, we have to sit down and do some real math, because the very next year I'm cutting down more trees in that same tree lane. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to treat those stumps with something like oyster mushrooms to break it down. I'm going to plant new black walnuts in between the stumps, and the canopy of the nurse trees are going to cover it, and is going to shade it and going to provide it nitrogen and do all the fun things that we've already talked about. And then I'm going to do it the next year, and I'm going to make $200,000 more if depending on what wood cost at that time or what I can sell it for. And walnut always fetches a pretty good price. And then I'm going to do it again. And then I'm going to do it again. And then I'm going to do it again. And here's where the scale of management starts to creep in to how this system actually works. Because it's not designed to be static. This is a dynamic system. It moves through time like it is itself a time machine. And you have to start thinking, how do we time this? And the same is true for pollarding the black locust. Where are the cows? What season is it? How much nitrogen is in the leaves? This ends up being a theme all the way through Cathedral. That's why I call it a clock. Cathedral is more than a church that you go pray in. It's more than a legacy for not only your family, but for multiple families. It's way more than that. If you look at it from above, by where the trees are being felled, and the new trees, how tall are they? How old are they? You start getting a sense that the entire system is a gigantic century clock. By the end of 100 years, you should have killed or cut down every single tree and replaced it. Every 100 years. So you would be able to walk through Cathedral and know what year it is without looking at a calendar, without having to remember it in your head. by where the cows are. You could tell what day of the month it is. Clearly, by where the sun is in the sky and the color of leaves and all that kind of stuff, you know what season you're in. But really, you'd be able to tell it was June 2nd rather than June 1st. So not only is it a clock, Cathedral is also a calendar, if it's managed right. But now flip it upside down. Let's look at it from underneath. It's a giant computer circuit. Every tree is connected to every other tree. Every grass plant is connected to every other grass plant. All the grass plants are also all connected to the trees through the circuitry of mycorrhizal fungi. 1,000 acres completely interconnected by every species on Cathedral. Every tree, every bush, every grass, every legume, every forb. It's all connected together. It's a gigantic processing unit. And what does it process? Ecosystem data. Temperature, time of year, moisture, nutrients. What does it do with that information? Logistics. It moves water to where it needs to be moved to. It moves nutrients where they need to be moved to. It's a communications network that allows things that are being attacked by either disease or insects to relay that message to everything else in the system, which it will, because we know it happens. We have evidence, not only a little bit of scientific evidence, a lot of scientific evidence that is exactly what's happening. It's going to take chemicals produced by trees under attack or grasses under attack or forbs under attack by insect or disease. It's going to shuttle that chemistry that says I'm being attacked to all the rest of the plants in the system. And each one of those plants that can identify that particular molecule as, oh shit, my cousin's under attack, I better start producing this other kind of chemistry so that the grasshopper that's eating him won't eat me. And that grass that transmitted that emergency message may not directly be attached to the cousin. Maybe the message went through one of the black walnut trees and then bounced off a thornless honey locust and then bounced back to a forb in the graze. And then in the same grazing lane right next door to it is the same kind of grass plant that says, I know that molecule. That is not a good molecule. I better start girding my loins. The entire system is a clock, a calendar, and a computer. This is the way that I think about Cathedral. So that's sort of recapping to what's happening today. I do want to go ahead and end here because we are at 73 minutes in, and there's no reason I'm nowhere close to exhausting how this system works. Nowhere close. Right? So don't worry. This is not the last time we're going to be talking about Cathedral. I do want to remind everybody that my Comfrey Owner's Manual has now dropped. It is at bitcoinshow.com. That's bitcoinshow.com. Let me actually just pull it up. I want to make sure that it's going to be in the show notes. I guarantee it. And hold on here. Let's see. I need to go to the Comfrey Owner's Manual. So it will be bitcoinandshow.com/the Comfrey Owner's Manual is here. That's about as good as I can do it. Just search, Bitcoin and there's a little search function. Just type in Comfrey Owner's Manual and you'll get to the page. You got to sign up. All I want is your email. You have a selection of either the free tier or a paid tier. It'd be nice if you did the paid tier and support what it is that I'm doing here, but you'll be able to get the Comfrey Owner's Manual if you do the free tier. That's okay. It will require your email. All right. So yes, I'm doing it. I'm doing the thing where you give me your email. I get it. For all of you that really don't like that, I understand. And I'm not going to berate you for it. I get it. But this is the situation we live in, right? I want people to have this free owner's manual because it tells you what to do with Comfrey. It tells you where to go get your Comfrey. It tells you a little bit of the history behind Comfrey. It tells you how to make liquid fertilizer out of Comfrey. It tells you what other wonderful things it does. And Comfrey is going to play a huge part inside Cathedral, I haven't even gotten there yet. I haven't gotten there yet. We've talked about biochar for a long time and charcoal in the ground and what it can do. I haven't even talked about the system that produces it and what its inputs are. And all of that is part of Cathedral. I call it the carbon group, but it's all part of Cathedral. So I just want to leave with you understanding, go to bitcoinandshow.com. That's bitcoinandshow.com. Sign up, get the Comfrey Owner's Manual for free, and learn about Comfrey, because it's probably going to be a major section of one of the Cathedral episodes that is coming up. And when that time does come up, I will see you on the other side. This has been Bitcoin and I'm your host, David Bennett. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and hope to see you again real soon. Have a great day.